Hello, welcome to Snuggle Up. Just concentrate on your breath and start listening to the story. Today, we are going to listen to the story Susan and the Magic Mirror. This is the tale of Susan, who was the daughter of a very rich man and a very kind-hearted one too. He loved his daughter no less than she loved him. For a long time there was happiness. Susan's mother had died when she was a small child, and so it came to pass that one day her father married again. Not long after the wedding, a cloud of grief settled in the girl's heart because on a silent moonlit night, when she walked with her father, he told her that he was troubled with a sickness and feared that some enemy had cast a spell upon him, so that day by day he grew weaker and weaker and weaker. Because of what her father had told her, Susan was sad and often wandered to a quiet place where she could tell her troubles to the trees. The stepmother not only disliked Susan, but was very mean and treacherous, hiding her hatred from the father and petting Susan when he was near, stroking her hair and saying pretty things. So well did the wicked woman play her part that nothing could have made the father believe other than that she loved Susan quite as much as he did. But see how it really was with Susan and her stepmother. There was one day, not long after, when father and stepmother and daughter were standing by the fountain, when the man suddenly felt a clutching pain at his heart and was forced to sit down for very weakness. When he felt a little better and the first sharpness of the pain had gone, Susan walked with him to the house, and when he was comfortably seated and had a feather robe cast around him, he asked her to return to her stepmother. She did that only because her father asked her to do so, since she would have much preferred to sit on his lap. And what was her terror when she came upon the wicked woman talking to a great horned owl that sat in the hollow of an old tree. Seeing Susan, the stepmother took her by the hand and drew her into a place where they could be seen by the father, yet far enough away to be out of earshot. The father, seeing the woman and the maiden standing thus together, was happy, thinking that his daughter had a friend. It made him happier still to see the woman take Susan's arm and pull it gently around her waist. But he did not hear what was said, for he heard it would have cut him to the heart. This is what the woman said, and Her voice was like a poisonous dart as she whispered loud enough for the owl to hear. She hissed in the girl's ear, "I hate you, hate you, hate you." And the owl lifted his head, blew a little, and repeated softly, "Hate you." From far off in the woods came the sound of an answering owl, like an echo. "Hate you." And it seemed to Susan that all the world hated her for no cause. Soon the stepmother spoke again. "Susan, your father cannot live much longer. The spell is upon him, and day by day he hears his death. Because of that, I am glad, for when he dies, all this land, the house, and all its riches must be mine." Mine. Hearing that vicious speech, Susan was faint with fear and horror, and would have sped to father to warn him, but the woman caught her by the wrist, twisting it painfully, and pinched the soft place on her arm with her other hand, and stooping again, so that it seemed to the watching father that she kissed Susan, she said, "But see to it that you say no word, for the moment that you say anything, that moment your father will fall dead." Now, while all this was going on, there lived in the hills far off a youth whose name was Oliver. He was a herder of goats and llamas who had seen Susan from a distance in her comings and goings, but could never summon the nerve to speak to her. He loved her silently. He was a brown-haired and bright eyes too, with clear skin and strong arms, and all who knew him said that he was a good lad. One day Susan chanced to see a falcon screeching and wheeling high in the air, carrying something in its beak that sent the rays of the sun flashing far. Then the bird dipped with the thing it was carrying, looking like a glittering falling star, and Susan for a moment lost sight of the bird as it dropped behind a bush. But it soon rose and took to flight, this time without the shining thing. So Susan went to the place where the falcon had dropped something. She saw a bright round piece of silver. She rescued it and looked at it with astonishment. A polished and smooth disk it was, that reflected her face as clearly as a mirror. So she kept it, wrapping it in a leaf, and took it that night to the place where Oliver lived with other herdsmen. There was a very wise man who knew many strange things, and he told Oliver that it was the wonderful mirror of one called Peter, long since dead. He said that whoever looked in it saw his own face as others saw it, but whoever owned the mirror saw something else. With the mirror, you may see the hidden spirit of other people, see through the mask they wear. And if a man has the face of a man, but the heart of a fox, then certainly while such a man beholds his own face, you shall see the other creature in him. Hearing that, Susan was much amazed at the magic of the thing. The wise man was looking into the mirror himself that very moment, and when Susan looked over his shoulder at his reflection, she did not see the rough bare face of the man, all knotted like a tree trunk, but she saw a face that was full of kindness and gentleness. Oliver stepped up from behind to gaze at the mirror too, and Susan saw in his reflection a face of eagerness, gentleness, and strength. She felt glad of what she saw in both of them. Susan thought that with the mirror she might learn some clue about the mystery disease that ailed her father, and so she asked if one of the two fellows would accompany her back home. Oliver's friend said that he was too old for such adventures, at which Oliver wondered that he could gain some good impression with her. Quickly he volunteered to come with her, so he gave the care of the goats and the llamas to his friend, gathered his arrows and bow, his flute, and after bidding his friend good-bye, he set off with Susan back to her home. On the way, he told Susan of a mysterious experience he had had the night before. There had been a thin new moon that night, and he had slept but little because of the croaking noise made by the frogs. Presently, fully awake, he had sat up, and it had seemed to him that the air was full of noise, not only of frogs, but of the owls and bats. Presently he had seen a great white two-headed toad. Then from rock and hole slithered unclean and disgusting creatures of all sorts, and all these creatures had gathered in a circle with the two-headed toad in the center. Soon the white two-headed toad sang, "Who knows where hides our queen?" And first one creature and then another had answered in a song, "The toad, our queen, lies hidden soft beneath the stone that men have wrought." And so it went on, a mad and horrible concert, with bat and owl and great ghost moth whirling about on silent wings, until Oliver had risen up and clapping his hands to his ears, fled from the place. Since then, Oliver had heard this refrain in his ears. The toad, our queen, lies hidden soft beneath the stone that men have wrought. Surely, said Susan to Oliver, these are strange goings on. I only wish I could understand what it is all about. Soon they both arrived at Susan's father's house. Susan, her father, and Oliver had a good time talking to each other, and then Oliver took out his flute and played music until the world seemed full of peace. Susan, too, sang sweetly, so that for a moment the father thought that the shadow that was upon him was but a dream and might pass. They talked long and long, and then came the stepmother, who fixed her large dark eyes on Susan, not looking straight but sideways. Susan's father was happy until then, but catching the eye of his wife, he was reminded that his life was flowing away, and the old grief came upon him. Somehow, talk fell upon Susan and her new mirror, and the strange way in which she found it, though no mention was made of its magical qualities. The father came to see the mirror, looking over Oliver's shoulder and seeing his own reflection. But what Susan saw was a face that denoted great bravery and kindness. Admiring the disk, also the stepmother stretched her hand across the table and took the mirror, gazing at the picture of her own dark beauty. Then Susan stepped to her side and looked into the disk. She saw not the dark eyes and night black hair that her stepmother saw, not the face of a proud woman, but the face of a double-headed white toad. Horrified, she continued to gaze, and Susan beheld about her stepmother's two writhing white snakes, a sight so horrible she could scarcely prevent herself from falling out. But all of this the stepmother knew nothing, and did not even guess that Susan knew her, for she was a wily witch. Susan's father, who was already tired, stood up shivering and beckoned to Oliver to give him an arm. Oliver shivered too and said, "I'm sure there is some enchantment in this place, for though the sun is warm, I feel a chill, as if some clammy thing enfolded me." All of a sudden, Susan's eyes fell upon a large grindstone that lay nearby. It was a stone so great that two men could hardly raise it, and so it had been left there for years, and grasses had grown about it. Susan had seen it there countless times, but this time there leaped into her mind the song that Oliver had heard. The toad, our queen, lies hid unsought beneath the stone that men have wrought. It had meant little before, but in a flash she saw that the grindstone was a stone wrought by man. So she whispered to Oliver to fit an arrow to his bow, to hand her his weapon, and then to lift the stone. With a great effort he raised the stone, heavy though it was, setting it down to one side, and there, in a hollow place where the stone had been, sat a large, white, double-headed toad. "Shoot, Susan, shoot!" commanded the father. "Let not that evil thing escape. It is the creature that torments me in my dreams at night." Swift flew the arrow in Susan's hand, and it pierced the body of the toad. At the same moment there fell from the roof of the house two monstrous white serpents where they had lain hidden. Like lightning, Oliver, having seized the bow, sent two arrows flying, and each serpent was cut in half. In less than 3 moments, 3 evil things died, and it was like the sun coming from a cloud veil, the way in which joy came to that place. The weakness of the father fell from him like a cloak. The bodies of the toad and the snakes withered and shriveled, and as a light breeze sprang up, what was left of them was blown away as dust. The whole world seemed to burst into song. So both father and daughter knew then that the witcheries were gone and the evil creatures vanished forever, and that all that the trouble had been upon that place had come from the wicked stepmother. Very soon Susan and Oliver were married, and the father soon regained his health and strength. Then they were the happiest people that ever lived in the whole world.